Hello, and welcome to the Games User Research Podcast. Today we'll be talking about reporting the results of user research, both in academia and in industry. I am Anders Draken, and with me today, as always, I have my co-hosts Lennart Nake and Pejman Mirza Papai. Sorry, Pejman. Reporting is really boring. Why are we talking about this? I want to do research. I don't want to write stuff about it. Why do we care about this?
I mean, there is I think there is a discussion, or to me, reporting is actually not that boring. It's actually the most exciting part of the project, mostly because that's where you get to communicate all your hard work back to the team, and I think reporting is not only like writing stuff on a paper or in a PDF and sending it. It's like, I think everything we do when we are trying to communicate our findings back. So it might be a meeting that you report your finding. It might be to a workshop, or it might be to a PowerPoint presentation or a written document that you submit. So yeah, I think that's kind of in my opinion, that's like the best part of the project, because you get to actually, deliver your findings, and hopefully that's the time to have impact on a product that you're working on. But then sometimes I feel that part might be a bit rushed at the end as well, because you already conducted the study. You're probably ready to move on to the next study. You want to get the reporting done and then move on. So it's usually, I would say, maybe the most challenging part of the work as well. And the reason I say it's challenging is because even if you do the best study possible, but you don't report your findings in a way that, let's say, it can be applicable or even believable by developers, then you have very little impact on a product that you have evaluated. That makes it important and challenging and exciting part of the project.
I feel like you're giving me some subtle hints about some of my research papers when you're saying that people aren't reading them. I mean, is that what we're talking about here, or this is your cue to say something? No, Anders, your papers are awesome. I've read all of them. Blah.
I think it depends on. So I would differentiate between maybe reporting study findings in an academic context and as well as in comparison to industry context.
Sorry.
I was just thinking, in academia, usually we write that paper, we submit it, we get it published, and we hope for the best. Like, we don't really write it in a way. I mean, we try to write it like as a exciting, readable document, but that kind of like making sure people would read it is usually not part of the writing process in most cases. Where in the industry case or context, you really need to be able to deliver those findings, and you really need to be able to. I like to use a word like be persuasive, like in your presentation, in your report, because that becomes a really important part of your work to have an impact on actual product.
But when you say be persuasive, you're not talking about how should I put it? You are talking about persuading people to read the report or to accept the results of a report, not necessarily persuading them about something that isn't true, right?
I would say both. So, I think step one is to, let's say, persuade them and convince them that you have done a good work. Then that they would read that and trust your work, and then also take action on your suggestions. So it's kind of a multi-level of let's say persuasion involved. I don't know, maybe persuasion might not be the best word. It might be let's call it like motivation maybe, or even convincing people on those. But I think in the same way, it might be the same when we write the academic paper as well. You want to, justify your finding. You want to convince your reader, particularly your reviewer before publication, to make sure that they understand why you have done that, what you are trying to communicate, what are your impact, what are your contribution. I'm sure Leonard has a lot to say about reporting or writing academic papers. So I don't know, Leonard, do you want to add some stuff?
Do you want to jump in here, Leonard? Like I was thinking that I guess one way that maybe at least sometimes we see a difference in between like a user research report that we do in a company and a user research paper that we see in academia is that in a company setting, we want someone to take action. Like it's a document that needs to motivate and inform people so they can make decisions and take action from it. Whereas I guess on the academic side, we definitely want people to sort of continue our research and sort of take some action there. But I guess it's sometimes a little bit more vague or maybe even nebulous on the academic side what the actual call to action is. But anyway, Leonard, what do you think, mate?
I would completely disagree with you on that one. I don't think but this is the way that I write papers, and I mean, like, I'm obviously, because I'm teaching this course for 7 years at Kai now, and I have it on my website now, kaicourse.com. Go there. But one of the things that you really want to emphasize at the end is to think about what are the takeaways, right? Like, if you don't have good takeaways, if you don't have a good sort of summary and ideally a call to action, yes, at the end, then what's the purpose of writing the paper? Sure, you could do a highly theoretical paper where you do sort of an argument and you kind of think about why dogs are super cute, and then you list all the positives and the negatives about cute dogs, and you kind of come to at the end you still want to kind of come to a conclusion there, right? So in an academic paper you still draw that conclusion, and ideally you do a little bit of a call to action at the end of it. But yeah, in games user research, I think that's more important. There's more emphasis put on that. It's also different writing styles, right? Like in general, sort of the methodological rigor that many reviewers will push you towards in an academic paper is not as necessary in a user research environment. Yes, you want to make sure that the facts that you're finding there are actual facts, and you can, with a high degree of certainty, say that these things happen and these are things that matter. But, and this is something that came up before in our podcast, the most important thing is always being able to tell a story with that data that you have. So one thing, I think as academics, we're sometimes, too hung up on getting the actual data right and like fantasizing about, this amazing, rigorous data collection work. But then we sometimes forget to tell an interesting story with that. And I think if you're in a games user research environment, that's not necessarily the case as much. It's much more important, and the salesmanship, if you want, is much more important at the end of a report. And actually not just the end, the entire report, really, because from the beginning to the end, you want to make sure that you're giving academic researchers a bit of a, not academic researchers, you're giving stakeholders at the company a bit of a reason to buy into that research that you're doing, right? I think that's at the heart of it. Really working hard so that you can give your manager a reason to say, okay, here's the value of that research, right? Like, here's how it actually helps them improve that game, or how it improves our process. And this is probably also why this is much more done in PowerPoint and in other formats than it is in the more traditional formats, right? So something to keep in mind there.
So are there any are there any best practices for the reporting of user research? that we can sort of draw out, whether in an academic setting, industry setting, or both, or any other
I'll tell you
setting,
one
really.
thing. Yeah. I'll tell you one thing that I just noticed, because I just come from grading a bunch of UX final reports, and I make them, write UX research reports.
It's the season, yeah.
It's the season, exactly. And one of the things that I always have to emphasize is prioritize your findings. Like, it just bugs me when people just have this unsorted list of findings and there's no priority on it. By prioritizing your findings, by having a priority attached to each finding that you present in the report, you're making it easier for this to be actionable. So you're basically having a top-down to-do list where you're saying, this is really the first thing you should be looking at. And then it becomes actionable automatically, because I'm saying, here, this is the emphasis, do this first, then do this, then do that, right? Like, if you don't do that, then where do I start? As a person reading the report, how do I take action now if I don't know which one of these I should address first?
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
How do we actually rate? Like, if this was a test report, right? What could such a rating system look like? Like a scale of 1 to 5, or what do we normally use, Patchman?
So, in terms of prioritizing, I think that's what you're asking. So, I usually have or use two measures to decide on a priority of an issue. I'm talking about like an industry context in here. So the first one is the frequency, how often that issue happens. Let's assume you are building a jumping game, and the jump mechanic is really annoying. Then it happens a lot, so that automatically make that issue one of your highest priority because of the frequency of that action of the issue. The other one that I usually consider is the impact of the issue. So let's imagine you build a game, and in your first level there is one action that you need to do, but players don't know that. And it only happens even once, like it's only in your first level, that puzzle, that whatever they need to do. But players get stuck there and quit your game in the first level. So although that issue has a very low frequency, it happens once, it has a huge impact, because if they get stuck in the first level, they very likely leave the game and never come back. So those are the two things that I often ask people to consider. One, how often that issue happens, and what's the impact of that issue. And then considering those two, then you can decide on the priorities of things you want to fix.
Yeah, Leonard, what would your recommendations be in terms of sort of best practices in how we write reports?
I think at the heart of it is that you need a good structure, whether it's writing Kai papers or it's writing reports, like having a template, something that you can work off of is really key. It makes it easy to fill in the sections, to know what you need to be talking about. Obviously, the findings are the core part that are in the middle. At the beginning, I kind of like to have a little bit of the discovery bit, if you're doing discovery type of research, where you're talking a little bit about the segment that you're analyzing, you're characterizing your sample. Some people like to do personas. It's not very common in games, much more common outside of games. But even then, often personas are not used to their fullest extent. And again, personas are really only good if you're actually representing sort of market research, if you're actually representing your audience. If you're just kind of making up something, then you got nothing there. So don't do like art personas or something, or like just come up with a name in the fancy pictures. No good for anyone. And so at the end, then you want to basically, you want to have these call for action. So you go into the findings, overview findings, and then at the end, you really want to be like, and this is what you should do next. Take the dog and go for a walk, sort of like really being actionable in your suggestion at the end. This is obviously a lead into Azure as well here.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Not like if what we are trying to do is to inform decisions, we need to make it as easy as possible to make those decisions, right?
Yes.
To really help people be informed by the research, which means really making all the evidence, all the evidence clear. But also I'll say one other thing is also be very aware of the biasing the decisions that the relevant stakeholder will make, whether it's in the form, whether doing it by a research paper or a user experience test report, right? We have to present the evidence and then be a little bit careful about not interpreting the evidence, right? It varies. I'll say it varies a little bit depending on the context, but there is a difference in between providing information to a decision maker and being a decision maker, right? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting to consider. The way I try to approach it is it's usually kind of trying to cover three aspects when reporting a finding or reporting an issue. And again, I'm trying to focus more on an industry context here. So the first thing that I try to cover is what did we observe, or what's the issue. So kind of explain that. The second part is to explain why that issue exists. So let's say, kind of going back to that previous example that I had, let's imagine the issue is players cannot solve the puzzle in level 1. That's our issue. Then why that issue exists is, could be various reasons. It could be that, the players don't know the mechanics that they need to use. The players may not know which button on the controller they need to press. The players may not know, the puzzle might be too difficult. So we need to understand why that issue exists. And then the third thing to talk about, and that's where communicating with the stakeholders becomes important, is what's the impact of that issue? What happens if you don't solve that? Again, in our case, that's a puzzle in level 1. If you don't solve it, you have a high chance of players quitting your game. Or it might be another case that, let's say, a player doesn't know how to use a certain mechanic. The impact is that it's gonna, in the gameplay, whenever that mechanic is needed or that action is needed, players don't know how to execute that. So usually those three things should cover the again, what did we observe? Why is it the issue, and what's the impact of that issue? And these three should be able to make the issue or the findings more actionable as well, because now you know the cause behind that, so you can go and try to address that. Again, if it's about teaching a mechanic, you can make sure that there are enough instruction maybe for the players to understand the mechanics. There is enough time for them to practice before they get to that key bits that they need to execute. So yeah, basically covering those three usually leads to answer as well, to the action that's needed.
Cool. So I was wondering, are there any typical pitfalls or sort of common errors that you guys have seen people do a lot, whether in academia or in industry in general, when we try to report on the results of games user research? I mentioned bias earlier, but are there, do you have a top 3 pet peeves or something?
I mean, bias is clearly a thing that you just got to be aware of when you do that reporting. Yeah. I think another thing is overclaiming things. This is particular if you're a very junior researcher, you tend to overclaim the things that your data tells you. You're too keen to tell a story. So you gotta make sure you tell the right story. And it actually gets easier to tell these stories if you do qualitative research, if you have a lot of quotes from participants and just a lot of, a lot of things that create or weave together that fabric. I think that's really sort of key for that. Yeah, it's, sometimes when we're quantitative heavy and we have graphs, and we don't include things like error bars or other things when it should be a thing that belongs there, then we have issues in terms of like what the data tells. I mean, I don't have to tell you the classic visualization errors that happen, like skewing data or not having a uniform scale. Oh my God, like people don't do that, luckily, in user research, but marketing, sometimes not in games, but, we've definitely seen it like for pharma companies and other people like trying to sell things. There's actually this nice episode. I recently watched this show called Dope Sick about OxyContin and how that became sort of the start of the opioid epidemic. And they talked about one graph in particular where they kind of skewed that graph. And I'm like, every information visualization researcher should see this one episode where they clearly talk about this is not how you present data. And they take it to the FDA in the show. And then the guy also says, like, this is not how data should be represented. Obviously, they're trying to flatten the curve by having a non-uniform distribution there. And as a researcher, you see that instantly. But if you're not a researcher, let's say you're a stakeholder, you're a decision maker, and it gets presented to you in a way, then you can cheat with those visualizations, and that'd be horrible. But I've never seen, like, knowing that exists, yes, but I've never seen that happen in games user research. Luckily, I think we have a community of very educated, very smart people out there that are very much aware of these things.
I think Sorry?
I just think Pejman has a lot more like hands-on things that he stumbles upon in his work with some of the industry partners.
Pejman?
I really like discussion around reporting because, as I said, I think they're really important, also really interesting topic to investigate more, because I feel there hasn't been enough attention, both from like industry and academic researchers, on reporting. Like if you look at like even academic papers, there are loads of them on methodological contribution and very few on reporting stuff. There are like bunch on visualization usually, but that's like a very specific type of reporting. So overall, I wish there were more research on reporting. But back to kind of the common issues that I see, I think there are two that I could maybe I could remember immediately when you asked that question. One is providing a right level of details depending on who you are reporting to. Again, my context is usually industry context here. Same as like building a product, a report can be a product. So it would be a good idea to, let's say, user test your report before you actually send it to people who want to say, and also consider their needs when you are writing that report. So if you are writing a report that's going to go to, let's say, maybe one of the C-level executive or one of the VPs, they probably don't want to know like very small detail of something that maybe a programmer needs to know to fix it. They probably want some higher level information, maybe about overall gameplay strategy, maybe the time that it takes to complete the level, maybe really like big important issues that they need to consider. And then vice versa, if you are maybe working with a programmer or a designer, then you need to be very specific on or level of details that is relevant to them. So that's something to consider when reporting. The other one that I've seen, it is most common with junior researcher, is to let they add their personal emotions to the report without being too clearly justified. For example, they're making a presentation and they were like, oh, the designer did a really bad job here because they include this, or the game is so frustrating because they did that. But those emotions, it's very likely their personal opinion, and particularly problematic if they are not able to justify. Like if you say, I don't know, the menu design is really bad, and then leave it just there, you need to again explain why it's really bad. why do you think the game is frustrating? Like, you cannot just say the game is really frustrating without providing more detail. And that's something I've seen a lot, especially when we are like working with a junior researcher, that they look at the game and like, oh, this level was really frustrating. And I was like, okay, bye, tell me more. And I know one of my colleagues, he likes calling it like, he says like it's like a peeling an onion. So you just need to dig deeper and deeper, like layer by layer, and get to that information that it's the core of the problem. And then that's something that can be then specific enough and actionable for people to, for relevant stakeholders to take action on. So yeah, those are my two.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say those are my two key things.
So that on my side brings up two questions. One is, when we're writing an academic paper, we always take great pains to define our terms, right? So when we talk about frustration in games, we would always have a definition. It might not be a definition everyone agrees with, but it would be a definition that would have some sort of an argument for based on previous research or whatever, right? To what degree, when we write a report within the industry based on a test or a piece of user research, do we always need to define terms like frustration, fun, experience? Like would you normally have a section in a report that defines these terms, or what's your best practice there?
This is actually a really interesting question, and something that I think last week I was discussing it with one of my colleagues, because we came to know that issue. Like, so I haven't done something like that in the past, or very rarely maybe. I may have done it once or twice in some particular cases. But in one of the projects I was working on recently, I noticed that there is and again, industry context, I noticed that there is a disagreement or misunderstanding of those terminology. And it was some of the, like not even things such as frustration, but what do we mean by usability issue? What do we mean by user experience issue on that level? And I think I mentioned some of these in the last week podcast as well. And that kind of, that highlights the need of basically what you mentioned, to try to come up with at least share our understanding of those terminologies, to make sure everyone at least could know where we are coming from. Like, it's even before we agree on those terminologies, at least we can say, when we refer to usability, these are the 5 things that we are focusing on. When we are talking about like frustration or difficulty, this is what we mean by that.
That would make a lot of sense. And another thing that I was thinking about is, like, whenever we do research that involves people, I feel like we always have a lot of assumptions that we need to make, right? And there are a lot of uncertainties that are involved. Like, one of the benefits of my line of work in analytics is that often we can work with the entire population of a game. So there are a lot of problems with sampling, for example, that we don't have to deal with. Lennart, do you have any advice for us regarding what's the right level of describing your assumptions or uncertainties in a paper? And Petsman, can you say anything about how we would deal with this in an industrial report?
Well, the gold standard is to acknowledge your limitations right from the start, and to also say why you made the choices you made about your sample. To say, this is why I selected this many participants. This is why I decided to study this specific group of users or participants or people. Everyone prefers the term people, not users. And so the idea behind it is essentially Be clear about how you're setting this up. Be clear about that from the start. And in academic papers, we always have that at the very end where we're saying, okay, the limitations are this and that. And most papers actually get rejected because they don't do that, right? Like junior authors don't know how to do that. Because the thing is, this can be a strong thing to say, these are our limitations, but this is why our results are still valid. That's a thought exercise you have to do as an academic, but also as a user researcher in industry, to be clear about, these are the caveats, but this is also why this still makes a lot of sense. So it's important to be able to balance those, right? And I think then you become more effective. Your results have more impact because you're not lying. It's trust is really important. Our colleague Steve Bromley writes about that a lot in his books about games user research. Trust is a really important factor. Building that initial trust as a games user researcher, you want that trust with the company. So it's important that people can trust you and that you're doing valid work.
Yeah, true. Pejman, any observations on in terms of industry reports or
Yeah, so I think I like to think about it from different angles. So on a core of it, I think one of the key maybe characteristic of researchers is that curiosity nature of it, and then we always try to, or not always, but often we are trying to make better understanding of a product that we are evaluating. And then we are using various methods and various data points that kind of contribute to that understanding. At the end, we make that recommendation or suggestion or that assumption based on those various data points that we are basically consuming. So that's okay. I mean, that's part of the work. The part that can be a little bit tricky is how these different data points can mislead us into a wrong direction. I give you one. I try to kind of anonymize it as much as possible, but that was the issue I was dealing with yesterday. I was looking at the game. We were trying to come up with some of the key issues that exist, and then I suggested one of the mechanic is a problematic mechanic, and then the data science team said that that's not true. It's an unimportant issue because our data shows no one uses that mechanic, or very a small percentage, like only 5% of players are using that feature. But then my argument was the reason only 5% uses it is because it's done really badly. And I asked them to investigate it more on that feature. And then it turns out that users that use that feature have a much higher success rate in trying to achieve whatever they wanted to, and the reason they're not using it is probably because it's not implemented very well. Otherwise, those who figure it out how to use it, they were able to success that goal much faster and easier. So, and that's an example that how these different data sets can mislead our understanding, our assumption. So in that case, that particular feature I think is important to fix, and that shows, and the evidence is how much it contributes to like user success in completing that task. And the low number of usage is probably because it's not done very well and it's hard to find or whatever. And then in order to, like usually I try to, when I'm trying to, both at the proposal stage, when I'm writing a research proposal, and both at reporting stage, I try to like state my assumption, as well as state what I'm not trying to cover or not I'm trying to include, both in the report and both at the proposal stage. So I want to be very clear on, this report, for example, is not about this and this. So don't try to kind of read it and then overinterpret that into those topics that's not included in the research. But again, very interesting point to reflect on and discuss more.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking as a person on the data science team, I can only agree that one of the challenges that we have here is always that data have a great allure, as I call it, right? And it is incredibly easy to look at or to fall into the trap of looking at behavioral data and not realizing that that they tell us what people do, but we only draw inference as to why. And this is why I always see game analytics and game user research and user experience research in games as really going hand in hand. We really need both of those angles to understand players, right? Awesome. Yeah. Anyway, we are running out of time here, folks. Are there any final comments? No,
I
awesome.
think that was a good one. I really enjoyed talking about research, and thanks for bringing that topic up.
It's awesome. Thanks, everyone. Look, this has been incredibly interesting, and as always, it feels like that we're only opening the lid on something. We're not really getting into depth here. So we will have to talk more about this in the future. For more on games user research, go to gurbook.com. That is GURBOOK.com, and check out the book. And to our listeners, thanks for listening and looking today. We hope it was enjoyable and informative, and all the best to everyone.